Okay, and then I'm going to start the webinar and then we can begin. Okay, we're good to go.
All right. We live and recording. Wonderful. All right. Welcome everybody to our April ECC meeting. It looks like we're still waiting for a few folks to log on, but we have a packed agenda ish, or I don't know, we'll try to make as much use of what we have here. So I think I can't see everybody in this view. Let's see. We'll start with a roll call. I know there's a couple people that aren't planning on, or that might not be able to make today's meeting or might show up late. So we'll just see who is here to start and we can modify as we go forward. So as I call your name by first name, then go ahead and say here. Bill Welf.
Here.
Covey.
Here.
Kelly, I believe, is absent today. Kersey.
Here.
Mark.
Here.
Neil Bonsgard is here. Peter Grube. I don't see him, but he might join later. Rory.
Here.
Serena.
Here.
Tess also mentioned that she might be joining later, but is not present. Ann Berkey, are you here? I don't think so. And then Sasha.
Here.
Okay.
I'm just gonna leave my video off though, because our Wi-Fi was dug up during construction, so it's super slow.
No worries. And it looks like Peter Grube.
Present. Running late, but I'm here.
No worries. Glad you could make it. So as a reminder, if you want to get the meeting packet open to get the agenda up, then we can get started. We're going to start with the minutes. So are there any comments on the minutes for folks after you reviewed the meeting packet, minutes from the 3/11 meeting? We didn't spell Bill's name wrong this time.
Yeah.
All right. With no comments, does anybody want to make a motion to approve those?
Sure, I'll make the motion to approve the minutes as written.
No.
I'll second.
All in favor, raise your Zoom hand.
Oh my, I have to go find it.
Looks like the motion passes with everybody present voting yes. And it looks like Ann Berkey is here now as well. All right, so the next section is public comment. It looks like we have 5 people here. Covey, did you have a question, or are you okay? Looks like we have 5 people here that, at least at this point, that are looking to give public comment. We have about 10 minutes for public comment today. And the guidelines for giving comment are on the screen right now. If you're on mute right now, if you have a comment, please use the raise hand function, which is in the bottom tray of your Zoom tools. And then I will call on you, and that will allow you to unmute. And then when you're done with your comment, click on the hand icon to lower your hand. It doesn't look like we have anybody that's called in at this point, but we'll start public comment with Teresa And are the other folks that are attending the meeting wanting to make public comment, Paula or Russ? Just put your hands up. So we have about 10 minutes. So if you can keep your comments to about 90 seconds, or that would be great.
Okay,
Teresa, we can have you go first.
Okay, so Teresa, I've just allowed you to unmute your mic and you should be able to share your comment.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Hi, my name is Teresa Shader. I live in Bend. I'm a volunteer with 350 Deschutes as well as other organizations in our community. I'm here to speak to agenda item number 5 regarding hazardous waste rail transmission in our community. And I want to thank the ECC for taking action so quickly and thoroughly to develop a draft resolution. My husband and I have owned our home here in Bend for about 8 years. We moved here to be part of a smaller community that valued the outdoors and had a thriving business community. We enjoy recreating in the area, participating in Bend Parks and Rec events and their various facilities. And we make it a priority to support local businesses, restaurants, food trucks, brew pubs, bookstores, and value what they bring to our community. Though we're not within the evacuation zone of the rails, we're just outside that 1 mile evacuation zone. Our lives would be greatly impacted should a spill around downtown area impacting these businesses and threatening the Deschutes River. I've reviewed the resolution and the accompanying memo. I find it comprehensive, well thought out, and thorough, and completed in a short amount of time. There is, however, one addition that I think would help the completeness and kind of close the loop. And this is in section 2, because after all the hard work of the environment and health impact statement, I think it's going to be important to add that we communicate the results and create an action plan based on those results. And this would, just ensure that all the funding and the resources used to create that statement would kind of close the loop in addressing community concerns. With this addition, I would like to ask the ECC to join close to 40 other cities and towns in the Pacific Northwest and recommend that the Bend City Council pass the resolution citing health and safety as well as environmental concerns around the transport of fossil fuels through our city. So thanks again for listening to my concerns and others in our community and allowing us to provide input.
Thanks, Teresa. Next is Laurie, and you should have the ability to unmute now.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. So hello, my name is Laurie Herrer. I live in Bend, Oregon, and I am the volunteer and program coordinator for 350 Deschutes. I want to thank the Environment and Climate Committee for this opportunity to speak. And today I would also like to encourage this committee to officially recommend that the Bend City Council pass the resolution expressing safety and environmental concerns with transportation of oil by rail through the city of Bend, which, as Teresa said, is item 5 on your meeting agenda. I live just a few blocks away from Vince Jenna Stadium and about 700 feet away from the train tracks. I looked it up on Google Earth. I regularly walk my 1-year-old son to play at Kiwanis Park, which is literally right next to the tracks. And so when I learned that trains carrying hazardous fossil gases come through Bend on a regular basis, the loud train horns that I hear all day and night change from just being a nuisance to a reminder that the risk my family and neighbors live with every day. So I was really relieved to see that when the issue was brought to the attention of the city council, they immediately sent it to this committee to make sure that our town takes the right steps to ensure the safety and well-being of our community. I want to thank Cassie Lacey and others for writing up such a thorough and thoughtful resolution that highlights the responsibility of our city, state, and country to prioritize the safety and well-being of citizens when managing hazardous materials transported by rail. While I'm very happy with how the drafted resolution is written, if I were to request one change, it would be to add a statement to section 2 requiring the findings from the environment and health impact statements to be communicated to a person or entity to plan appropriate actions to fix any problems or flaws. I appreciate that you've all paid attention to statements like mine and others who are concerned about this issue, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Laurie, and killer timing. That was right at 90 seconds. So thank you for that. Next person we have is Kaylee. I don't know what that timer is.
Hi. Yeah, can you hear me? It's Kaylee.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, good morning. I would like to start by thanking the ECC for providing this dialogue. My name is Kaylee Finner and I grew up and currently reside in Redmond. I would like to take this time, similar to Laurie and Teresa, to speak to item 5 on your agenda today. When I am not doing volunteer work with 350 Deschutes, I spend over half the year fighting wildfires throughout the Western United States. As a first responder, I've seen entire communities devastated from wildfires, but can't help but believe that the dangers oil trains create isn't much different from a natural disaster, except that we have the power to control this one. Like Ben, the train tracks that run through Redmond are not obscure. Unfortunately, I know that passing a similar resolution in Redmond will not be as easy as passing one in Bend due to local politics, which is why I believe Bend must lay the groundwork for other local communities to follow suit. I would like to thank the ECC for recognizing the importance in this issue in a timely manner by drafting a very well curated resolution. I was very pleased to see the committee took such a methodical, thoughtful approach when considering the health and safety of our community. I believe that you've gone above and beyond what is expected from this committee. However, similar once again to Laurie and Teresa, my one ask would be that you include an addition to section 2 in the resolution that states that the findings from the environment and health impact statements be clearly communicated to a person or entity that has the power to plan actions and make adjustments based on these findings. I appreciate you allowing me to take the opportunity to speak today and trust that you will make the proper decision when the time arises. Thank you for your time.
Muted. All right. Thank you so much. I don't see any other hands raised, but there was somebody that called in. So if you are the person that called in and want to make public comment, if your number ends in 9792, just press *9 and that will raise your hand so then we can unmute you.
So I think that's actually Tess, but I'm unable to promote her to a panelist in call-in mode, but we know she's here with us.
Sounds good. All right, not seeing any other hands raised. The 2 hands that are still raised are people that have already spoken. Then we can move on to updates. And I don't remember, Cassie, did you have any particular updates that you wanted to give?
So yeah, usually that's held for me to provide updates. I don't actually have any today. So I don't know, Neil or Serena, if you have any you want to add, or if anyone has any questions about updates on the city side that I just didn't think to bring up right now. We can talk about those. Otherwise, we can just move on.
Open floor. Anybody have any updates or questions for where we're at, things that aren't on the agenda? Great. So the next section we're going to jump into is a conversation about bike rack, and Serena is going to lead that, I think. Yeah, so Serena, you're
Great.
so.
Hello, everyone. So the bike rack is basically the newer version of what we've been calling the parking lot in the past. It's a more environmentally friendly version of that. Thanks to Neil for bringing that to our attention, or to mine at least, because I hadn't heard of it in that way. Basically, you know, so far in our meetings, we keep talking about, you know, issues that are coming up from public comment, as well as things that we're talking about internally within our group through these meetings, and we just don't want to get anything lost in the shuffle. We also want to be aware of any pertinent timelines and dates that are required for these items that we're talking through. And of course, as much as we love seeing each other, there's only so much time in the day and only so many things we can cover in a meeting. So we want to make sure that we're really diligent and making sure that we're prioritizing all of these topics that are coming up. So we're going to have a regular agenda item that has a document that explains, you know, what's in the bike rack, again, with any specific timelines or due dates, as well as any point person that we need to, that's kind of overseeing that topic, whether it's a subcommittee or Cassie or somebody else. We just want to make sure we're keeping track of that. The other thing too, this is now the time, if there's other things that we want to bring to attention as a group that we don't necessarily have time to talk about in the meeting today, this is not part of the agenda, but we want to, again, slate it for a future agenda. Now would be the time in this meeting, as well as going forward, to bring that to our attention. It'll be part of the bike rack. And then of course, as things are being attended to from the bike rack, they'll be removed from the bike rack. So it'll just be an ongoing document that we're keeping track of. So we're not forgetting anything, and that we're being mindful of the issues that are taking place in our community from things being attended to us, as well as from public comment and otherwise. So open to discussion if anyone has any questions or suggestions on how to, I guess that's the question. Anyone have any thoughts on this? Bill?
Sure. I think it's a good idea, and we'll just have to remember when we're having discussions that if something needs to have a little more research or whatever, or we can't get to it, to be sure to put it there. That seemed like a good idea.
Great. Mark?
Yeah, I'll also say it sounds like a great idea. I like this. And one thing is, it also seems like a way potentially to address some of the emails we received as committee members from other statements people have made in the community. And I don't know if there's a mechanism for that, maybe even sort of have a place where we remember to check in or have a committee to think about that. But yeah, it seems great, and just seems like a good way to make sure we fully consider everything that's sent to us, and people put the time and effort in to write something for us.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good reminder, Mark. That is, we're hoping that also this is a tool for the public to see the issues that we're addressing and the ones that we have potentially marked in the future, so they can also plan accordingly for public comment and otherwise, if we can slate things appropriately. All right. So yeah, expect this to be part of our agenda going forward. We don't expect to have too much time allocated to this, but we just, again, want to make sure that we're opening the floor for all of us to be able to address any new issues or concerns or thoughts that may be coming up in your world that we haven't necessarily addressed or is currently slated on an agenda. So that's all I got. Thanks, Neil.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Serena. I know we talked about this a lot before in check-ins with other committee members, having a more clear process for understanding kind of when and where we can be having these conversations, and making sure that stuff doesn't get lost is part of the goal with this. But so hopefully that will help. And then we also still have the agenda setting items. So if we talk about something in the bike rack and think that it needs a longer period of time, we can just kind of flag that for adding to the next month's agenda as well, or bring it to a future subcommittee or something like that. So thanks for that, Serena. So our next section, I think Cassie is going to start leading the conversation about the agenda item 5, fossil fuel transport by rail, which was the city council request that came in about a month ago.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. So I just have a couple of slides to help us follow along with this discussion. But as you all should have seen in your packet, and I shared at the last meeting, we recently had a lot of concerned community members asked the city council to adopt a resolution opposing fossil fuel transport by rail in order to address the risks associated with fossil fuel or oil train transport through Bend. And so the city council, we heard from several of those people today during the public comment. And so the city council is interested in addressing this issue, and they requested that the ECC consider the topic and make a recommendation to the council about how to respond to this concern and to address this issue. So I'll provide you with some background information on this issue, which is explained in the memo. So I'll just kind of be summarizing what I sent out. And then Mary, our city attorney, is also here to help discuss and answer any questions about what our options really are as a city for addressing oil train safety. And so what we're looking for today is ideally a recommendation from you all as to whether or not the city should be taking action on this issue and what that action should be. And to help with that, our legal team helped draft a potential resolution for you all to consider should you decide that what you'd like to recommend. So that's also included in your packet, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But just by way of background, over the last decade or so, there has been a dramatic increase in the amount of fossil fuel getting transported by rail in the United States due to just the increasing domestic oil production, which then gets exported overseas. And a lot of this rail traffic comes from the Pacific Northwest as it's coming from places kind of in the Midwest and getting sent to West Coast ports to get sent over. So there have been several high profile accidents in recent years in the Pacific Northwest where these oil trains have derailed and caused major spills, which create environmental hazards. And oftentimes the derailments have caused dangerous fires. And in some cases, people have been seriously injured or killed. The largest kind of recent one was in Mosier, Oregon in 2016. And then there was another one in Eugene, Oregon in 2016. And most recently, there was one in Custer, Washington, which is near the Oregon border in late 2020. So as a result of these incidents, individual cities have been responding by adopting resolutions, kind of stating an opposition to this type of transport through their communities. And then they'll also request certain safety measures be taken when oil trains do travel through their communities. And often they respond to the issue by writing letters to their congressional delegations, advocating for state and federal legislation that can help make oil train transport safer. So I'll pause there for just a second, and I want to ask Mary from our legal team if you can just share a little bit more context about what the city can legally do and cannot do with respect to oil train safety, just to help the committee understand what their options for recommendations are.
Yeah, hi everybody, good to see you all. This, not surprisingly, the transportation is heavily regulated at the federal level. And the interstate commerce, which involves moving of goods and raw materials, is regulated by different laws. The main one is the Federal Interstate Commerce Commission Termination Act, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it includes a broad statement of federal jurisdiction over rail transportation. There's also federal laws related to the transportation of hazardous material, which is regulated at the federal level. That all means, as a home rule city in Oregon, city attorneys are fond of telling our clients that we have all powers to regulate unless it has been preempted impliedly or expressly by federal or state law. And in this case, there are a myriad of federal laws that deal with rail transportation. That isn't to say that cities haven't tried, and I did a bit of research on how successful those have been. And pretty much from what I saw, like Alexandria tried to affect rail shipments with ethanol loading, preempted. I mean, I just looked around and just Googling, it seemed like when cities have tried to somehow get in some regulations at some piece of this issue, the railroad companies have lawyers and they just say, no, you're preempted. So it's not just in Oregon. And that's why you see in these resolutions, there isn't actual prohibitions, there's requests for something, but that it is and stepping back, our research showed that this is an increase in the last decade with rail transport, but we all use energy, and the other option is transport on our highways and on our rivers. And so it's not like it isn't being transported in other ways that we might find as equally offensive. So it's something of a tricky issue, and whether we would like the result if oil wasn't transported by railway, I'm not really sure, but regardless, some cities are asking the federal government to look at it more. So that's kind of a long way of saying is we do not have the ability, even as a home rule city, to start being regulatory with the railroad industry as it travels through Bend. The state we did find, which was Kathy's about to talk about, has done some regulation, which is some good news on train safety and response and emergency funding. That's happened since we've seen these other resolutions. So that was kind of good to know. And you'll see that reflected in our resolution.
Thanks, Mary. So a lot of the resolutions that we reviewed, the types of things they would ask for include requesting things like and a lot of times what they'll do is they'll write the resolution requesting this, and then accompanying it will be like a letter that actually gets sent out to your federal delegation. And so some of the requests that are made are requesting that federal or state governments, whoever can regulate the railroad companies or oil companies, that they do so by creating requirements such as increasing the transparency about proposed expansion facilities. So there would have to be some sort of better notification process when, a new oil line that's going to be used a lot is coming through a community. Regulations about emergency environmental cleanup plans, and then having them create those environmental impact statements for any new proposed oil by rail terminals or oil routes. Other things that they request are that the state government conduct a comprehensive review of safety procedures and emergency preparedness, supporting the development of a comprehensive area-wide environmental impact statement. So kind of looking at a larger scale, like a regional scale, what is the big picture environmental impact from this transport to identify the impacts, that's one of the things that we included in our proposed resolution. And then sometimes they'll request things like submitting letters directly to rail carriers who are involved in the transport of oil or other fossil fuels, requesting that same transparency and communications and emergency response that they're also asking the federal government to regulate. So what we learned as we were researching this is that in response to those accidents that I referenced, the state of Oregon did actually pass legislation in 2019 to begin addressing oil train safety on high hazard train routes. They identified a network of high hazard routes in Oregon, and the rail going through Bend is part of that high hazard rail route. So we're included in what this legislation created. And what it did, so the legislation and the subsequent rulemaking, which is still ongoing, is focused pretty specifically on the emergency response to oil train accidents. So it included some things like creating a new fee to fund a position within the Oregon State Fire Marshal office that would be in charge of like drilling and exercises for responding to emergency situations. And then just establishing other kinds of contingency planning requirements for high hazard train routes. So what it does is it goes a fairly long way to addressing the issue around responding to an oil spill once it occurs. And I talked to the staff that are working on this about it as well. But what it doesn't address is a lot of the elements that we've seen other cities ask for in their resolutions or letters, which is more of that better planning and better impact assessment on the front end when new rail routes are being proposed or expanded. So with that background, what we're looking for from you all today is a discussion on the questions. One is, do you recommend that the City Council take some kind of action to address the safety issues of oil trains traveling through Bend? And if so, what is that action? Do you recommend adopting a resolution, or do you have ideas for other types of actions that we might want to take, such as just sending a direct letter to our delegation without adopting a resolution? And then I think also what we're looking for is, if you do want to pursue something like that, are are there additional specific concerns or requests that you want us to highlight in the resolution or to include in the resolution based on what you've heard today? And I guess, well, I guess I'll pause and see kind of what your initial responses are. And if you all decide that you do want to move towards the resolution, we can talk a little bit more about what is in the proposed resolution that we have included and see if that matches what you guys are interested in. Peter?
For starters, on a big picture level, are oil trains the only hazardous material running through Bend, or do we have other trains with hazardous material going through? So why is there an advantage, or why are we focused specifically on oil trains? And would there be advantages to looking at other hazardous materials coming through town? If there are any.
A good question. I don't know the answer to that. Mary, I don't know if you know the answer to that. I'm assuming there's other high hazard materials.
Yeah, I mean, partly that's because that's the request, and the models we looked at seem to have my understanding, as we said, in the last 10 years, there's been an increase specifically in oil, and that is because of the push in the United States for more domestic production, to not be so reliant on foreign oil, created this need to transport oil domestically. So I've read some big reports on why this has happened, and that's the reason for oil. Whether other hazardous material, I mean, the accident in Eugene wasn't oil, it was some sort of gas, I forget what gas it was. So that one is often cited, but when I actually tried to find the news article, it wasn't oil. So there's other things that are transported by rail. One thing that Bill Booth at our fire department told us is it would be really helpful to know what is coming and when, but the railroads will not tell the fire department because of concerns over terrorism. So I think some of our information is unknown and is more high level. We know what's happening in the Northwest, but we don't know specifics about what's coming through Bend because of concerns about that information, even to our fire department, being public, which is, probably a little legit.
So I'm just inviting the committee to think, is targeting oil trains specifically going to be more politically charged than taking a more of a blanketed health and safety response that would also apply to oil trains, but also engages anything nasty coming through town in order to build maybe more of a widespread consensus on controlling and preparing for response and maybe limiting these things?
Mark?
Yeah, a couple of things to respond to on that, and then a few on my own. So I've done a fair amount of work on this topic. Oil is seen as probably the most consequential. There's an Oil Pollution Act at the federal level because of this. There's been a lot of research in recent years. There is risk of expansion, certainly from under CERCLA and natural resource damage assessment. There are other contaminants, but oil tends to have its own entire response team and process. Department of Interior has a whole policy and program on that. I was at the national conference on restoration in 2016, which was in May, right before the Mosier spill, and DOI was worried about how they would handle those kinds of spills. So they're harder to deal with, and they have more consequence in terms of sort of the volume of contamination. It is important to think about the different modes, though, and last year there was a nice study that U.S. Department of Transportation put out comparing rail, truck, pipeline, and boat shipping, and shipping tends to be the lowest risk, but rail tends to be the highest risk. There are a few different metrics you can think about in terms of number of incidents, volume of spill, human consequence, but in general, rail looks pretty bad. There's also LNG, liquefied natural gas, has just had a rule made in 2019 or 2020 to legalize rail transport of liquefied natural gas. That's probably going to get reversed under the Biden administration, and there is a lawsuit. Earth Justice has a lawsuit against that rule, and I was working for Earth Justice on their national policy around that in 2019. But it is sort of a risk issue. And the other point I wanted to, so I think the risks, sort of summarize, I think the risk around oil, especially oil rail, is particularly high because the consequences and the cleanup issues are greater, and sort of the long-term environmental contamination issues are greater. I think it's also important for our committee to think about sort of the broader sort of climate consequences of these different approaches. And I know that's not explicitly in the resolution, but we might think about adding something there. When I was doing my work on the LNG rule, one of the things that comes up is that a fair amount of the shipping is tied to accessing foreign markets where prices are higher. So it can indirectly drive up prices domestically. It increases total extraction and sort of the intensity and geographic extent of gas and oil extraction within the U.S. And then rail is much less labor intensive. So the job arguments, when you hear about the fracking arguments that were at play in this last presidential election, if you're moving from trucks to rail, there's much less of a job impact because there's so much less labor involved in rail than trucks. So there's a bunch of stuff like that. I could go on and on, but I think in general, I think it is a good, important, high priority issue, and one that isn't easy to solve in other ways. So I think it makes sense for Ben to try to avoid it. Thanks.
Bill?
So I was been thinking about several things on this as well after reading it. I agree with Mark that maybe the resolution should mention something about fossil fuels and reducing the need for them. We're just encouraging it. In essence, this seems like a way to avoid the issue that no one can ever build pipelines anymore. So you put a pipeline on a railroad track is what we've done. Trucks are too difficult. But what I didn't see so much in here is about mitigation. And I think, yes, we have to come up with all of the ways to respond to a spill or derailment, but it feels like we need to strongly recommend that that the railroads take steps to mitigate it, like better rail cars. And I don't know, communication, which sounds like a problem, but it seems like maybe an emphasis on some mitigation would be useful in this, as well as the actual response. And another question that came to mind was, how much have we communicated with other cities that are along the rail routes to get them to see if they have the same concerns, and that it could be maybe spoken with one voice to the federal delegations of each of, there's Washington State probably. I don't know if the baton comes across Montana or if it comes across probably Wyoming, I would guess, but who knows? Anyway, maybe that might be useful too for in the resolution, perhaps. I do think that the resolution is important, and I think I would recommend doing it. I did have one more question, then I'll shut up, is where does the piece that the folks that in public comment, are we going to look at the resolution in a minute and just see where we actually look at where that might fit and if we want to include it?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. Anyway, I think summarize on mine is I think want to make sure we think about mitigation as well as response, and maybe reach out to some other cities along the way.
Okay. Rory?
Yeah, thanks. And quickly want to say thanks to Mark. It seems like quite a benefit that you've already researched this so in depth. I learned a lot from your comment a few minutes ago. I sort of took it for its word what some of the info in front of us today says about the increase in over the last 10 years of oil by rail. And I made assumptions about that leading to greater safety risks of oil compared to others. And you sort of, I think, validated it for me in describing some of the research you've done. I do support the city passing this resolution. Just, anecdotally, for what it's worth, I have a really close friend who grew up in Mosier. His mom was evacuated back in 2016, and it was really terrifying for that community. And I'd hate to see it happen here. So, recognizing the federal preemption involved and that this is largely a symbolic action, passing this resolution, it's still important. And I think it's one of those things where a critical mass of cities passing similar resolutions can eventually lead to federal action, which is the ultimate goal, I think, here. I had a couple suggestions for the draft resolution in front of us. I appreciate in our packet today, and I think Mary mentioned this too, that our fire department said that they would like just information of current oil by rail transport, which currently there's nothing requiring the railroad companies to do. So I think in section 3, where we send a letter to our delegation, we could include that. The language in there currently talks about making public plans for increased rail traffic or new or expanded facilities. It'd be great to have federal legislation requiring railroad companies to give local fire departments information about current oil by rail transport. And then second, I pulled up the city of Eugene's similar resolution. It has a lot of the same language. Theirs is from back in early 2017, but their section 1, sort of the policy statement, is much stronger than the draft in front of us. It simply says the city opposes oil by rail transportation through and within the city of Eugene. And I think if Bend is seriously opposed to oil by rail, because of the things we've talked about, the safety risks of derailment, and what I think both Peter and Mark mentioned, the climate implications of putting this more rail out to market, I don't see any, I think only good can come from a stronger statement of opposition of oil by rail through our city.
Thanks, Rory. So maybe what we'll do is the next slide I have actually that language from the resolution, just so anyone, the attendees can follow along as well. But it sounds, I don't know if we have a quorum on moving forward with a resolution, which is something that in a moment, Neil, we might want to check in to see where everyone's at with making a decision. But it seems like there's definitely at least some interest in moving forward with a resolution, but potentially we want to add some things. So the one that we have proposed, these are kind of the main sections. The first is that the city is expressing safety and environmental concerns with oil by rail transportation. So that's the one I think Rory was just referencing, that an alternative is to say the city opposes oil by rail transportation. The second section is the one that a lot of members of the public were commenting on. This is that the city council supports the preparation of a comprehensive area-wide environmental impact statement, which would identify the cumulative effects that resulting from existing and proposed oil by rail terminals. So again, that's and also looking at the health impacts of that too. So that's kind of like a bigger picture with all this increased oil, like what are the impacts? And my understanding was that the recommendation coming from members of the public was that we create something kind of actionable following up with that, like we respond to the results of that.
So can I just speak to that for a minute? Just, I'm sure most of you know this already, but this is a request. So we're supporting it, but it's not preparation by the city, it's preparation by the federal government with no timeline, just asking. So this is a programmatic environmental impact statement under NEPA, which is the federal law that the federal government has to prepare the document. And programmatic are these higher level where there's a broader policy proposal, planning level decisions. That's a programmatic EIS. Whether they would do it regionally, the entire state, what this EIS would be based on, we do not have control over. They publish a notice. If they even decided to do it, they would publish a notice of intended action to do a programmatic EIS. Whether we would know, I mean, Cassie and I, are we watching the notices under NEPA? Not really. Maybe we would know through some other mechanism that this was happening, but we could comment on that programmatic EIS. But I get a little reluctant to say the city is going to take action out of a federal document that we have no idea what it would say. We could certainly follow up and hope that this happens and see what it says. But I just get worried about us at the city violating our own resolution on a process that is not ours and we have no control over, and might not even have anything that's actionable because it's programmatic. So
Yeah,
if we're
what I
going to
was
have some
thinking.
language, I think it needs to be very general, that we will review any results of a programmatic EIS, see if there's anything to implement at the local level. Just something high level like that would be fine, but that was a bit directory. And I think, well, I don't even know what it would say and who it would apply to and what states are covered. And so I just wanted you all to understand what this proposal is asking for.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I had kind of the same thought about like whether that high level EIS would have actionables for like a city, especially like a smaller community, like a Bend-sized city. And then the third section is that the city the city would send a letter to our congressional delegation requesting legislation in the following areas. One would be requiring railroad companies to make public any development plans for increased rail traffic, providing adequate notice to local communities of any plans for new or expanded rail facilities, and then requiring compliance with state law related to emergency environmental cleanup plans and an effective community notification system. And the good thing for us is because of this new Oregon legislation, the state law does have requirements on the railways, I believe, for having better emergency planning. So if there was just a little bit more enforcement around making sure that they're complying with the state law, then that does go far. So I do think that the mitigation piece that was mentioned, I think by Bill, I think that legislation is meant to get at that to have them do a little bit better on mitigation. But if you want that to be different or stronger, that's just, you can share that with us too. Mark?
Yeah, I was going to say on this point, and I don't know to what extent we could have this kind of language, but more assurances for complete cleanup. Because I think what we see with oil spills is the responsible parties are almost never actually covering all the costs, and they always end up saying that it's too expensive to do the full mitigation. And when I've worked with tribes on this, they always say, well, if it's too expensive, why are they still doing this? That ultimately there needs to be more pressure that if you're going to take on these risky actions that have these external cost risks for communities, you should at least have stronger assurances to take responsibility for cleaning up your mess. So I know this is sort of a legal issue, and an EIS wouldn't really get at this either, but maybe just something else to think about if we're talking about language. Again, though, if this is all in terms of coordination for a state level effort, I just think this is one area that, especially on the oil spill front, we don't see responsible parties even cleaning up their mess in general very adequately.
And there, my question would be, without spending a huge amount of time researching it, whether the 2019 state law has now like preempted what cities do, because the new state law has a provision, and they're in the midst of adopting administrative rules. They were supposed to have a hearing, and then this got pulled from the agenda, but on the DEQ website, they have their posted rules, and they have new rules on requiring oil spill contingency planning and fees. They're actually going to now charge it's good. They're going to charge fees for these contingency plans to the railroad company. So I'm not totally sure how much their specifics is addressing the concern that you're raising. But there's definitely requirements in those rules.
Yeah, no, I think there's certainly, this is an issue everyone's aware of, and there's a push for it. And ultimately, if you put the prices, the cost back onto these companies more so, then you'll see, that if they see the real cost, they'll try harder to avoid causing these problems and avoid the communities where it would be a big issue. I'm not saying that's sufficient, but I think it's a piece of the process to make sure that, if we're basically stating our endorsements for these broader efforts, I'll just say from my experience, that's an important area to emphasize too.
Okay, Kirsty, and then after Kirsty, maybe we have a lot of other stuff to get to on the agenda today, so we can talk about how we want to carry this conversation on. But Kirsty, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious what happens if Bend decides to not have oil trains come through here. Does it go somewhere else? Does it come through a different channel? Are we sending this to another community? What are some potential changes that would happen?
Well, I don't think we can decide for oil to not come through here. I think if that was possible, yeah, I likely it would travel through another community. I think you're probably right about that. But my understanding is that that's not an option. Is that right, Mary?
That's correct.
Yeah. So what does opposing this do? What are some actions that could come out of the city of Bend opposing it?
Well, it is like a few people have said, it's partially symbolic because it doesn't do anything incredibly directly. What it does do is communicate to our state and federal legislators and encourage them to adopt this legislation. So when I spoke with the staff people that work at the DEQ on the new statewide program, I was asking them what their opinion was of these resolutions and what kind of impact they have. And they actually felt like they did make a difference because they felt it was important for the legislators to hear this is an issue that our communities want to address at both the state and the federal level. So it's mainly that, communicating to the entities that do have the ability to regulate that this is a priority for yet another community. Okay, so it sounds to me like there is interest in a resolution, but we want to amend it a little bit. And I think in this full large group, it gets a little bit difficult to work through the wordsmithing of exactly what we want to add. I have ideas from some of the comments, but I'm wondering if there's maybe 2 or 3 people who would be interested in, if Mary and I kind of work on an updated draft that captures some of your comments, if there's a couple of people that would be interested in reviewing that and kind of helping to refine that. I think that's fine, Mary, if we do that, right, in a small group.
Yeah, that's fine. I guess from the group, so me and Cassie, that was a conscious change that Rory saw the difference between our resolution and Eugene's, which said opposes. I mean, just having been around Bend a long time, I sometimes have seen groups lose some constituent support when a view is kind of predictable that you're just going to oppose everything. So that was my at least thought process. And do we know enough to actually oppose all rail transport through the city of Bend? Is that a position that council, the ECC wants to recommend and for council to take? So I think if a majority of you wants to say that, then we should know that and change it, which is completely your prerogative. It's just, it's in some ways it's a, you know, political policy decision for your recommendation.
Can we do just like a hand raise vote on that particular topic? Is that fine for us to do?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe, because I think that is kind of.
Let me ask a quick question on that. I mean, is it possible, yeah, we may oppose it, or some subset of people may oppose it, but we can't really stop it. So if we acknowledge that rail traffic is going to come through here because it's regulated by the federal government, but what we don't agree with or we oppose is that it isn't being treated safely. We aren't doing enough to make it safe and look at the impacts. That's a different statement than saying we're opposed. We're opposed to the way it's being done because it's not safe for our community. And plus we get to pay the extra cost that the folks who are making money off it aren't paying.
Exactly. That's a different, I mean, we got into this when we did the first climate action resolution. Is it's sometimes the way you frame it. If you, so this was framed though as an opposition to the transportation of oil by rail right up front. And sometimes that can just make some people not read anymore because they think, oh, you're just against cars, you know, so again, this is your call to make. Right. And I'm not saying what I agree with or don't agree with. I'm just saying what I've watched over the years, how things can be read and heard. So and if that's the strong statement you want to make, then as recommendation, then other cities have done it.
And Bill, that's that what you described is what we were trying to get across. Yeah, with that other language.
Yeah, that's what we did.
Rory.
Yeah, as I already said, I am in favor of the strong statement. I don't think there's any way to make this completely safe, the volume of oil going through our cities. And that's the safety side of it. The environmental side and the carbon emissions that come from this oil, that's also something that can't really be mitigated with the volumes that come through our city. So I would push for the stronger opposition language. And again, as Mary has very well explained to us, this is symbolic. We're asking for action from others. So I say, if we're going to ask for action from others, we might as well be as strong as we can with that ask.
Okay, so maybe to get a little bit of clarity from you on that topic, if we could have you raise your Zoom hand, the options are going to be if you want to have the stronger, like the city council opposes oil train travel, oil by rail transportation. The other option is going to be if you are comfortable with the way it's written, which is softer, expressing concerns with the safety and environmental issues. So if you raise your hand, if you want to switch to the stronger opposition statement, raise your Zoom hand. Okay, and then I just want to make sure we're hearing. So if you would like, so put your hands down, and if you're in favor of sticking with how it's written as is or something similar, raise your hand. Okay, so it looks like we had 6 for the stronger language and 2 for as is. So I think Mary, we can make that edit. And then I do want to add a couple of, well, I think the main other change I heard was potentially adding something linking to like climate, which I was thinking we could potentially add in the first section, like opposes oil by rail transportation, and kind of adding a sentence about, partially as part of a goal of reducing reliance on fossil fuels in general, kind of thing, because of climate impacts. So is there just 2 or 3 people that would be willing to just review our edits? I just want to make sure that we bring it back and, because what we'll do is we'll bring back the resolution to the next meeting and have you all actually make a motion on it, but I want to make sure we're getting as close as we can to having the edits that you all are comfortable with. Could I have a hand raise of just like, even like one person would be great, but if 2 or 3 would be better. And it should be easy. It's just a review of a draft, probably just over email. Okay, so Rory and Mark are willing to do that. Thank you so much. So I'll just follow up.
So I apologize real quick on this. The resolution is a statement by the city. And it feels like there's 2 issues we're addressing. One is, are we making a statement about, hey, if you're going to bring all this oil through our community, do it safely? Or is it a statement that, you know, we're really against the carbon environmental impacts of the oil that's coming through the city? It feels like we're kind of trying to do both a little bit. And so what are people's thoughts on that? They seem like different issues. Like we could get wide support across the community from probably the whole political spectrum. Like, you can get this stuff through here, get it through safely, and do all the mitigation, do all the reporting, do all that. And if we have tucked in there, it's going to get a lot more contentious, but it's also the mandate of this committee to look out for the climate change impacts. And it feels like we're trying to, I don't know, not be disingenuous, but not take those both. They're both legitimate, but they're almost different conversations.
Yeah, it's a good point. You're now doing both and I would say other communities kind of have too done both, saying we don't like oil traveling at all. But it is, in fairness to you all, it's a recognition that you can't stop it. So your opposing of it isn't, you're not really able to do much with it, but what you are able to do is at least ask for it to be safer. And remember, we're asking the federal government to make it safer, not necessarily the railroad companies, because they don't have to listen to us.
I was just going to add, I totally hear you, Peter, and maybe we should vote on something like this, but I can imagine how it would be potentially useful in the resolution or some way to speak to what are the benefits and costs to Bend residents of these. I'm assuming, I don't know the specific volumes coming through Bend, if they're for export. I'm assuming that's the case. If I'm wrong, it would change this, but in general, if it's export, I think it's important to point out that there isn't any kind of benefit that residents of Bend, visitors to Bend are getting from that. It's not as if it's making it cheaper at the pump for us. It would be making it more expensive. It's not that we're going to be using it. I don't see, you know, I think if we're worried, Peter, sort of in general, not just ECC, about balancing risk and consequence and cost, and hey, if we all drive cars, we still need to recognize some of this transport is associated. But I think this particular type of transport, I don't know if there's a particular benefit, especially when there are strategies for lower risk modes, modes that avoid population centers, things like that. There is a way to be lower risk and still drive a gas vehicle. So maybe we don't know. I don't know, Cassie, if we do know, or maybe some at 350, if that's already in there, if we know that this is for export. Because these same issues come up for pipelines on the West Coast all the time, and the shipping terminals, and there have been EISs for pipelines and shipping terminals and transmission corridors through Oregon and Washington. And there is actually a lot of data on this, and our company has done most of the economic studies associated with them, but you almost never see any local benefits, I'll say, from being a part of that transmission corridor.
Do you know how to find that out, Mark? Because I tried to look and I found information on terminals, on export terminals, and saw EISs, but I couldn't find any information on what gets transported by BNSF in Central Oregon or really elsewhere. I don't know how to find that information. If you know, that would be great.
Yeah, I think some of it's in DOT data. Let me check and I'll send it to you if I can find it.
Okay.
Okay, and then Bill, and then I do think in the interest of time, we really should move on, but you can go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, just a short statement. I think to Peter's question, it seems like maybe they the stuff we were trying to say about opposing it coming through Bend and the climate impacts kind of go in the whereas section, which is section 1, and then the rest of it probably doesn't change that much. So it seems like it won't be super difficult to include the language, and it's going to come at the beginning, kind of as a statement about why we're doing, in the statement of why we're drafting this resolution to begin with. I mean, I might be wrong about that, but it seemed like a good place for it.
I think that's a really good option, Bill. So what we'll do is I'll work with Mary. We'll update it a little bit. We'll send the resolution to Mark and Rory to review. If anyone has any follow-up thoughts, they can you can feel free to send them to me that you want, like considerations you want us to include. And then we'll see a final draft of this next month. And then we'll have you all actually vote on it. And if there are specific, what we can do at that time is if there's like really specific things we add that really kind of change the intent, like if we want to make a statement about climate change versus not, we can, we'll highlight those and we can like go through those and do like a vote on each of those. And then that way, if there's not enough support for a certain change, we can scratch that, and but we could still move forward with adopting the resolution because we'd have the really specific changes we can make. So that's how I suggest moving forward, if that sounds okay to everyone. And I think as far as timing, Mary, it's okay if we finalize this next month, right? Okay, yeah. Perfect. Okay, thank you. Well, I think that concludes that discussion for today.
Great. So the next section is just following back up on the rubberized chip seal presentation that we had last week. There was some material sent out, and then kind of figuring out how we can wrap this up as a group. Cassie, I think you're on that. Is that right? Yeah, so we don't have specific information. Basically what we're looking for, other than what we sent out in the last email. But yeah, David's here. So David, if you kind of want to set up the context for the discussion, that'd be great.
Thank you, Cassie. And let's see, afternoon now. Good afternoon, everybody. So I got a couple visuals here and then just a brief discussion that might help. The discussion may help answer some questions or concerns that may have come up. So I will share my screen here just as a reminder on the locations of this proposed project. If I can get a thumbs up that my screen shared, that'd be great. All right, thank you. So a little bit more detail, maybe some folks had done some homework on their own as well, but the chemical 6-ppd, that was the determination from the study there in the fall. Our project development had started way before that study became public. And the 6-ppd essentially transforms into a 6-ppd quinone. And the University of Washington research and studies, pretty much to date are not a study on a chip seal project like we're proposing here, but it's rather a study on the particles and residual from wear and tear of all tires from all vehicles, really driving on all surfaces. And then once these particles or 6-ppd particles are exposed to the ozone, they transform into that quinone, new chemical kind of discovered there. And then when they're washed into the waterways and streams with a storm event, they're finding those impacts to the fish. So, we have not been able to put our fingers on, I'll call it, or our hands on a specific study related to the street preservation treatment and what degree that this chemical may be present with a rubberized chip seal treatment. I would expect the science to continue to pursue and look into this chemical and this application more thoroughly. Essentially, it took years. They studied thousands of chemicals, and tires have a large number of preservative chemicals in them. Took years for them to drill down and really land on this one as kind of the smoking gun, I'll call it. The search for that compound was complicated. Like I say, it's not exactly the 6-PBD itself. It's a transformation once that is exposed and reacts to the ozone, common in urban environments. So quick reminder there with the map. This here is the Parkway. This is 3rd Street. And so the location is east of 3rd Street. Here's Pilot Butte. So we're outside of what's called the MS4 drainage basin that drains to the Deschutes River. As I mentioned last time, essentially everything east of the Parkway does not drain to the river. And it probably would have been helpful to show this last time. Cassie, did my view change to a quick little graphic? So just if folks don't know, a chip seal project. So you see here, this light gray would be the existing asphalt pavement. And then in a chip seal application, what is titled here is the bituminous binder. So the dark black, that would be the asphalt binder that gets sprayed and applied to the roadway. That's kind of that, coat of paint like we talked last time to protect the siding of your house. That's that coat of paint to seal and protect the existing asphalt road surface, try to keep that road good. Then this uniformly graded aggregate, that's the chip seal rock then that gets applied on top of the binder and rolled in. So I'll leave that up there just for discussion here. I thought it might be helpful to give an idea of proportions. So like I mentioned last time, this asphalt binder, the dark black, asphalt binder that gets applied, 80% of that is normal basic raw materials in a regular chip seal. 20% of that is substituted for the rubber blend. And then from an idea on an application rate, the asphalt binder is applied at a rate of about 0.6 to 0.7, so a little over half a gallon per square yard. So not extremely thick, but thick enough to provide a seal there. So 0.6 to 0.7 gallons per square yard. And then it's covered with 24 to 35 pounds of the chip seal rock per square yard. So I thought that might help to give an idea of proportions. That chip seal rock is 3/8 inch minus. So the largest rock is a little under a ½ inch. So this isn't, a lot of small pebbles. And fair to say, the chip seal rock doesn't last forever. Maintenance is always there. I wish it would last forever and be sealed up and be done. But like we talked last time, this would preserve the road surface for a number of years. And then there would be another maintenance, keep the good roads good, seal project at some point down the road. And, so just to think about that a little bit, with 20% of that binder being the recycled rubber, a good majority of that is encapsulated in that binder. The 80% of that binder, it's encapsulated in that. And then the wearing surface, the driving surface is really that chip seal rock on top of the surface there. So with that in mind, my feeling is the risk is minimal, if not zero, especially being outside the MS4 drainage basin to the river. But we definitely want to keep an eye on this. Let the research continue. I also wanted to mention I have a meeting with the Stormwater Public Advisory Group later this month on the 22nd, and be having the same conversation with those folks. And so the recommendation or request, like we talked about from this committee, if comfortable, is kind of a blessing to proceed with what I'll call this pilot project. First time we've used this product, not new to the industry, but first time here in Bend, outside the MS4 basin and the river, and monitor it. And in any future use, at least at this point, any future use of this treatment, stay outside of the MS4 basin, outside of anything that does drain to the Deschutes River, until science or studies, justify maybe a different approach. Examples, studies not on a rubberized chip seal treatment, but studies of the chemical have shown that when that stormwater with that chemical is filtered through, a best management practices stormwater facility that, our plants call for in the city, stormwater projects, such as a bioswale or filter basins, things of that nature, removes or greatly reduces the chemicals. So definitely continue to monitor the science and the research and studies of this new identified chemical. Maybe even participate, since we're doing this, as I'll call it, a pilot project, is there sampling or testing we can do in this area, capture some water from the catch basins and that thing that, they don't go to the river, but we could maybe do some sampling. So the next steps, in my view, I was asked by to visit with you folks, as well as a stormwater public advisory group, to see if there was any, concerns or if comfortable with the project. And I feel next steps could be pretty informal on the feedback. So following my discussions on April 22nd with the stormwater advisory group, I would essentially report back to the city manager's office, based on the feedback from both groups, both committees. And I would anticipate that report back to council could be as simple as a city manager's report from Eric or myself, kind of reporting back these discussions with council. So if there's any questions for me, happy to try to answer them, and appreciate everybody's time again.
Any questions for David? Neil?
Yeah, so David, I'm glad you are able to get in front of the stormwater group, that I know that you'd mentioned that at the last meeting as well, and that was going to be one of my questions was if you had any feedback from that group. Curious from this group what people think about kind of our perspectives and backgrounds on weighing in on this topic versus the stormwater group. So curious if we have any identified concerns or support, or kind of where this fits in our purview. No.
So I guess I all along have been thinking, oh, you're substituting the rubber for the aggregate, and it's not, it's in the binder. So that seems to put it more firmly in place, and it doesn't seem like it's gonna migrate as much, and that sort of changes my view of it a little bit. And looking at all of the information that got sent out in the packet, it looked like zinc was the big thing that leached out of it, but if it's bound in asphalt, I'm really curious how much is actually going to get out into the water. But echoing Neil, I think it's really good that it's going before the stormwater committee, and because that's really the big issue when you think about it. You don't want it getting in the water.
Peter?
Maybe I'm reading the conclusions wrong on the study. The first two raised a little bit of a concern. Said the toxic heavy metals leached from the recycled rubber or rubberized chip seal are below EPA drinking water standards. That sounds good. And then number two says, however, zinc is not regulated in the primary drinking water regulations. So that seemed a little concerning. But maybe I'm reading it wrong. But that being said, it seems like I really love the repurposing of all the used tires we have and replacing the mining and extraction of raw aggregate material. So my sense is that it's no worse and potentially a big improvement over what we're doing already. And did I read those conclusions wrong, or is that what they say?
No, Peter, I think you're right. I could pull that up. I mean, again, that was a study of leaching from rubberized chip, and so it was covering a broad range, not looking specifically for this newly discovered chemical, and so it was kind of a broad range on runoff and heavy metals and things. I don't have that.
I'm way over my pay grade talking about anything to do with chemistry, and I didn't read the whole thing. I kind of jumped to the conclusions, and I was like, huh, those two conclusions aren't super reassuring. But again, like I said, it all sounds on the net sounds like a win as far as what I can tell right now.
Yeah, no, and that's been our feeling on it as well, Peter. I pulled this up real quick and
page 10 down there.
Jump to the conclusions here. I can share my screen, make sure we're talking about the same, and that way everybody can see it. Share. So
yeah, that's it.
Yep. So this was the one.
The last sentence in number 1 says it looks good. It doesn't. It's below the EPA drinking water standards. And the number 2 says, however, by the way, zinc is not regulated in the drinking water standards. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'll zoom down to it. But this was the leaching assessment of, what they called eco-friendly rubberized chip seal. Again, not looking for the specific chemical that has come up recently as a concern. And I was looking at it probably similar with you, Peter, like looking for red flags. Like, is this a good thing? Bad thing? And as you mentioned, the toxic heavy metals leached from recycled rubber are below standards. Majority leached, as Bill mentioned too, seems to be the zinc. And as you mentioned, not regulated primarily with drinking water regulations. So I think science is always evolving, and particularly around this new chemical, but it seemed, I was in agreement with you, Peter, in your comment of it's like a win-win.
David, do you need a motion or something specific from the group, or more just hearing kind of anecdotally each of their thoughts, whoever has thoughts?
Again, I feel like this is pretty informal. We were just asked to, visit with the committee and the groups and see if there was concerns. And so I guess I would feel good if I don't need every individual comment, not like you're going to be quoted, but if in general, the group, it could be a raise of hands in support or against. And if the majority of the group is in support of moving forward, I think that's, I think that works. And then I'd be happy to share with city manager's office and city council of, the highlights of the discussion. If there was concerns, or if the majority or unanimously feel like, yeah, this is a good thing, win-win, please proceed.
Okay. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. David, thank you. And thanks to the committee for all of their work on this. I just wanted to make the comment that I was the counselor that kind of elevated this to a discussion. And the reason I elevated it was not because of any concerns. I had not heard of any concerns at that point. I believe that this war on climate change is going to be won with every single individual making what I believe right now are very small changes. And I wanted to, elevate this to be noticed by the public that this is an example of something that we can do. And David knows the numbers, the number of thousands of tires per mile. That means tires not ending up in the landfill. And I just wanted to make sure that we were giving ourselves credit for that we, that somewhere we have a list of all of the things that we're doing, and up there and on that list will be that we are getting tires out of landfills by using them in our roads as this binder instead. Bill, I was exactly with you. I thought it was part of the aggregate instead of part of the binder. So that's interesting. And I'm happy to hear that it sounds like right now the committee is looking at that. Yeah, this seems to be, if anything, maybe it is better. Maybe it's neutral, but maybe it actually is better than the traditional types of binder and asphalt and aggregate that we've been using. So thank you all for your work on this. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Neil.
Yeah, I just wanted to open it up if there's any other questions or concerns or in the group, either particularly to the chip seal or to the idea of us taking I think we could either say that we don't have objections or we could say that we support. And curious and wanted to open the floor if anybody had objections or concerns, or had objections or concerns to the idea of us taking a formal positive vote on it.
David, do you have something to add to that before we get to the committee comments?
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to jump in. Cassie, do you know if the stormwater public advisory groups or if they're open to the public? Where I was going to say is that I would be happy to come back and report to this group briefly, maybe even in visitor section, the results of the stormwater public advisory group discussion, or report back to you on if they were supportive or concerns or objections. But it might be open to the public. I don't know, maybe Cassie knows.
Yeah, they are open to the public, and Wendy, who's the staff person for that group, said that she would also just extend an invite to any of these committee members from here that are interested. So I think if there are committee members that would like to watch it, we can give you the info. And at the very least, we'll certainly can report back next month about what their discussion was like and what type of, just what their perspective was. Bill?
So to me, it looks like you start weighing the pros and cons. The pros are you get tires out of the landfills, and so you're doing something useful with them. And in addition, if it's, now that I'm realizing it's in the binder, that's meaning less bitumen going into the mix. So that means we're using less fossil fuel in doing that. So you got a second benefit there. And then on the negative side, it's just, we don't really know exactly what the runoff is from the compounds that it's releasing. And that's the big, seems like.
Did I understand correctly from David's last presentation that another potential benefit is that this version of rubberized chip seal is actually more durable and lasts longer than the stereotypical or the old style?
Good, that's 3 then.
Was that correct?
Correct. The belief is it's more resilient to reflective cracking because it's got some elasticity to it, and so compared to the standard regular chip seal, the feeling is yes, it lasts longer, and so there's that gained efficiency. Definitely lasts longer than the slurry seal. We talked about various treatments last time, and so this is that additional tool in the toolbox for those middle-aged roads, I'll call it, that are beyond a slurry seal, but don't quite need that expensive, grind and inlay of new asphalt. So yeah, there's that benefit that we think this is a good life extension for the streets that would be appropriate for this treatment.
Probably too much to hope for that it's easier to clean off your car when it splatters up.
Kavi?
So I think the only one thing I had, I think it does seem like there's just way more benefits, at least in terms of what has been so far recorded or what we've learned from the studies. So it was really hard to find any negatives. I was doing some research independently online too, just to see if I could find any negatives that have been noted. The one study I did come across, and it's been really hard to find like the actual study information, but it mentions they did a study in California on 2 different roads, and one of them was in a high mountain road. And it mentions this one statement. I just want to just mention that it says the terminal blended rubberized asphalt chip seal is performing much better in the low mountain region for retarding cracking, but did not perform as well in the high mountain region, the report said. But I can't really find the actual report. So I just at least wanted to bring that to attention just in case there's any further research we can do for specifically the high mountain region part of it.
And thanks, Cabby. Yeah, there's a terminal blended, which means it's blended in at the plant. And then there's field blended, which is what we are doing, and which is what they did on that test in the higher range. Because I was in our research looking for that same kind of comparison of similar climate, and temperature changes and things. So we are doing the field blend.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
Okay, so Neil, kind of to your point about what you want, what type of kind of, like, it doesn't need to be a motion, but maybe just a simple vote. Do you feel like we're comfortable taking just a hand raised vote on whether or not people support it? Or do we want to ask a different question first?
It was an open question if there was anybody that didn't want, or, wanted to bring up a point of not supporting it, but it doesn't look like that's the case. Rory?
I was just going to suggest that if we do a quick vote to support it, we might have a disclaimer based on the Stormwater Advisory Committee. If their expertise comes up with something that we haven't, then we, will reevaluate.
Okay,
that
so
sounds
maybe,
great.
maybe
go ahead.
Oh,
go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Neil.
I was just going to say, Rory, do you want to turn that into a motion? I saw a lot of nodding heads.
Sure. So I moved to support David's project using rubberized chip seal, pending approval also by the Stormwater Advisory Committee.
I second that.
All in favor? Raise your Zoom hand. Of voting members present, looks like we have 8 yays. Any nays? Lower your hands for the yays. Don't see any nays. Motion carries. Nice work, team. We voted on 2 things.
We have a quorum, right?
I'm assuming we do.
Okay.
I don't know. We're only missing 1 voting member.
We need 5.
Great.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. And Cassie, or the group, again, I'd be happy to come back and see all your smiling faces again, or I can just, she's probably going to listen in on the Stormwater Public Advisory Group meeting as well. But Cassie and I can report back to you, either one of us, both of us.
Thank you for engaging all the stakeholders. That's awesome.
Yep.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, nice work, team. We have about 25 minutes left of a very long meeting without a break, sorry. So I wanted to check in at the last meeting and talk a little bit about the evaluation criteria that we brainstormed last meeting. And I know that there was some individual research and some background updates from Cassie on kind of where different actions were at from different CCAP actions were at, and wanted to come back to the proposed draft evaluation criteria, which is in the meeting packet on page 18. If you haven't taken a look at that, to see to see if there's any general comments on something that you felt like we missed, like going through the actions and kind of playing some of that mental prioritization in your head. If there's anything we missed in our list, or if there was any kind of process ideas that came out of that. My general take, and we tried to make sure that it was clear in here, is that these list of criteria are not prioritized. But these are just the metrics that we're wanting to kind of look into or evaluate based on our big brainstorm. So was there anything that you felt after diving in that's missing from this list, or any other kind of pieces of trying to pair those two things together? Bill.
I'm sorry, I always have something to say, but you can tell me to be quiet. The one thing I looked through them multiple times and tried to take some of the longer list and try to see if each of these more summarized bullets cover them. And one that I felt like maybe is missing is I think we need to prioritize things that are going to be lost opportunities, and maybe call that out. And maybe it's included in one of the others, or we can make sub bullets to clarify what they mean. But the things that if we don't do right away, or if the city doesn't do right away, we've lost the opportunity to get it, and then it will be so hard. It's always easier to do it right the first time than retrofit it. And or the old saying was, there's never enough time to do it right the first time, but always enough time to do it over. So that was one that jumped out at me. But otherwise, I was able to include, some of the things like, potential for greenhouse reduction, the energy supply, gas, long-term low efforts. Those would be incorporating, there's available funding now, right? Or there's already something in action going on. Those are things that do that. And then there's things that are enabling, that would be supporting long-term progress. And I also thought about in the leveraging community partners, would we not want to look for things that leverage outside parties as well? And that was, or is that part of the other bullets too? I don't know. Anyway, those were just a few thoughts. I mean, I think lost opportunity might want to be called out, but you can tell me that it's already included too.
I do remember some of the discussion on that, and I think maybe we could, the lost opportunities might be able to be added to something like the supports long-term progress / lost opportunities. I don't know if those are related enough, but yeah, I think it's something that's been discussed. Mark?
Yeah, I like that point a lot, Bill. I think that's a great idea, and I think I would endorse including it and letting it stand on its own, because I think it is distinct from long term. I think it is sort of taking advantage of efficiency opportunities as they arise. There are a lot of ways to say it, but your point, yeah, we know that restoration, retrofit, those things can cost 5 to 10 times as much as doing it right the first time. So yeah, I think that's a great idea and worthy of its own point.
And so I'm going to kind of combine the last two sections of the meeting agenda. So keep thinking of those things, but just as a reminder of where we're at and where we're going, our kind of stated goals. Or actually, can I share my screen?
Yeah, you should be able to.
Can you all see that? Okay. So this is the kind of reminder of where we're at for this meeting. Our goal was to review the criteria and kind of come back to, I'm really trying to not use the word circle back because I feel like it gets used way too much. So come back to the prioritization criteria and see if there's any more discussion, since we've had a month and time to sit with it and look at those different pieces. And additional suggestions for staff to include final criteria. Oh, right, because that's we're working with Cassie on that. And then our kind of continued process in between the meetings is, I know from the fact-finding mission meetings, that there's way more content than there was time in those meetings, was the general note that I got from Cassie, although a better summary might be necessary. And so spending some continued time of being able to dive into that, also through some other conversations as well. We really want to provide the opportunity to like bring the proper experts in and make sure we're not reinventing the wheel. That was something that Tess brought up as well, was like, you know, a lot of these most of these actions, if not all of these actions, somebody's done or has stated that they're doing. And so if it makes sense, you know, we can bring those experts into these smaller group meetings, so then we can get some more clarity on you know, best practices, missed opportunities with other people's implementation. So there's a lot of room for us to dive in and continuing that research, so then we can get a real clear picture of what we think is going to be effective for our prioritization and suggestions to council. So with that, maybe Cassie, do you want to give a quick overview of some of those initial meetings of transportation, energy and buildings, waste and materials, and energy supply?
Sure. I don't know that there is necessarily like any big takeaways, but we spent all of the meetings similarly, which is that we went through each of the strategies or each of the actions one at a time, and I kind of shared one, like whatever kind of progress has been made, if any, and two, any kind of like additional context around that action, whether it was you know, what the intent was. A lot of it was like, this is kind of what the idea was behind this one when we were doing the CCAP planning process. So most of the meetings we just had barely had enough time to like get through kind of explaining each of those. But what I see as the next step, or for you all to decide the next steps, is that the next time we come back and talk about these things in a group, let me I can't remember the exact timeline, but we have it basically in the June meeting, or by July. We're hoping that each subgroup can propose to the larger group which of the strategies within their sector they need to be prioritized. And so I think for you all to figure out is to feel comfortable with picking a couple to actually recommend as priorities. What else do you need to know about it in order to feel comfortable making that recommendation? And I think I feel like we scratched the surface of all of them. And the nice thing was that it gave everyone an opportunity to just kind of dig into the topics a little bit more, kind of share what their background knowledge was or what their thoughts were. But I think those conversations will need to carry on probably before each of the groups are comfortable actually, you know, deciding kind of what they want to prioritize. So to me, I think that's what the main thing is, to figure out, like, how do you all want to work together to do that? And I think it might be helpful to talk with Mary about which of those discussions need to happen in a public meeting versus what can you all do a little bit like more in small groups individually.
Yeah, and I know that's something that we discussed as well, and is the amount of work and discussion that's going to need to happen with this. I think it's going to likely be beneficial to us to start getting some meetings scheduled that we notice and make accessible, and then, you know, still provide opportunity for follow-up and, you know, things that are outside of those meetings. But I think that it's going to be, I think that that's a next step, is providing some of that more opportunity for more robust above the board conversation. And so that's one proposed task that proposed idea that I have for advancing this forward, is just like providing the opportunity so that we can have these meetings be large enough to have those conversations and start to dive in a little bit more.
So you want to schedule like public, like meetings with the subgroups to just start talking more, kind of just kind of just informally about what they want to prioritize?
That's my thought. I'm curious if anybody else has thoughts, or if there's still opportunity with kind of the existing structure to still dive in and ask questions and then do our deliberation after that, with a potentially larger group.
Rory?
So my thought is, if we continue our subcommittee discussions and move them more towards the prioritization of the different actions in those 4 sub areas, I feel like we might want to have first, as a whole committee, finalized our prioritization criteria. So then in our subcommittees, we can use that we've all agreed on to guide those smaller prioritization conversations.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, so if you look back at the timeline, what we had suggested, I met when Serena and Neil and I met after the last meeting, we kind of came up with this proposed timeline. And the plan was that at our next meeting in May, what we would do is actually finalize and vote on the prioritization criteria. So I think it is really important to finish the conversation from you all about anything you want to add. And then we can maybe have a longer chunk of time to talk about. In the meeting, we'll discuss what is our approach for deliberating the evaluation and the prioritization of the strategies, including, and if we determine that all of those need to be publicly noticed meetings, then we can spend some time actually trying to get those scheduled.
So I guess I'm trying to follow, without having been at all your meetings, what your groups are doing. So if you call them subcommittees, it's more likely they're what the legal parlance from the Open Meetings Act is a governing body, which then is subject to notice. And I mean, it's not so much an ADA issue with remote meetings, but it may be during this process. It really depends on what you want the group to do. If they're making a recommendation, so if they're looking at this prioritization and you really want the group to take some of the burden off the bigger ECC and make a recommendation, then it's a subcommittee subject to and they should be public, because the public wants to know what you're talking about in order to make a recommendation. If it's more fact finding, if you're really asking a few members to gather more information and report back either as a group or as individuals, then you can meet without being subject to notice and the open. So it kind of depends on what you're looking for. But if you really want flexibility to say, no, we've got too much work to do and we really need to go into subcommittees, subgroups, to do some of the work of the larger committee and come back with a recommendation, then the public should be able to see the thought process of that group.
Okay, so I think what the idea was, we'll have these evaluation criteria, which we'll finalize at the next meeting. And then I anticipate each subgroup, which had originally been defined as like kind of informal. It was just kind of interest groups for now, but each of those groups, I think, will probably go together and actually talk about, maybe they'll do it individually first, but then get together to talk about, I think this strategy meets these criteria, therefore it meets the most. So that evaluation process will occur publicly. So, right.
Yeah, if they're going to come back and make a I mean, if they're just doing it individually and talking about it amongst themselves and not making a recommendation back to the big group, then you can say they're just meeting. But if you want them to come back and say, this is what the group thinks and here's why, then it's more like a governing body making a recommendation.
Okay, yeah, and that's kind of what we thought. So I think that would be the idea, is that you all as committee members, between now and May, you're probably still just fact finding. So whether if you want to talk to experts to get more details on how some of the strategies might work, you can go ahead and do that. And then in May, we'll talk about hopefully finalize the evaluation criteria. And then we'll plan out more specifically. We can come up with maybe a proposed schedule. Maybe I'll try to even get those scheduled this month, but we can kind of lay out like the schedule for those evaluation discussions, which will happen publicly. That's kind of what I'm thinking. So curious to hear what people's thoughts are. Neil, are you going to say something?
Yeah, no, that is directly in line with my understanding, and I do think that fact finding opportunity is still pretty significant based on the meetings that I've been in. And yeah, but I saw Covey's hand up for a while, and then Kersey, and wanted to make sure you could jump in.
So my question was actually a step back, but we've talked about kind of finalizing the prioritization criteria quite a bit. Is there a lot more work that needs to be done on that? Because I feel like I thought we were going to be finalizing that today, so I wasn't sure if there's still more work we're planning to do between now and the next meeting on that. Or is there any reason we can't finalize that earlier? I just want to get the group's thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I think we just wanted to hear what, since it was the first time we were talking about that proposed list, just for additional ideas. But if everyone is comfortable.
Specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I mean to cut in, Chris. I just want to reply to Kavi's comment. I think I would, at least I would benefit from going through each of those evaluation criteria and making sure we're all on the same page with them, what they encompass and what they don't encompass, and maybe even, I don't know if there's a prioritization of the evaluation criteria. So I think we maybe need to have in the next meeting a discussion. If at least it feels like from my side that I would like to make sure I really understand the criteria before. I mean, they're sort of self-evident, but when I tried to piece all the other smaller pieces together, some overlap, some didn't, and I was going, well, are we going to go for one of these over the other? So felt like there were still a few things that maybe would be benefit from. Thanks.
No, that makes sense. I didn't mean to rush the process. I guess, are we planning to assign weights to the criteria or do any kind of ranking as well? Is that part of the plan?
That was my next question. I wanted to know too, Kersey, are you responding to this, or is your hand raised for another general topic? Okay. So yeah, that's an open question of how formalized we want our rankings to be. And I think that we have the ability to make them, if we agree on the criteria that we're referring to, I think that we could either create like a scoring matrix if we want to, or we could, keep these in mind and refer to them in the, in the broad prioritization of the projects as they come up in each subgroup. So what do folks think about those two, what do folks think about those two methods of using these criteria? Lots of hands. I'm going to go backwards. Peter Grove, you go first.
I think it's a valid question on how we use those criteria. In my experience on like the Affordable Housing Committee, when there's lots of good causes and limited resources, sometimes it comes down to overlaying the evaluation criteria. So I think they need to be really thoughtful, and or if they're just like, hey, let's keep this in mind when we're judging, it's not such a big deal. But I know we came down to using our evaluation, and it's just sort of a non-emotional way to like, we got to move forward somehow. And then I want to make progress quickly also, but I also agreed that I'm not sure that we're all on the same page. And I come from the building industry lens, and my building industry lens is a little concerned a little bit on some of one of the evaluation criteria when the time comes.
Bill?
So I've done a lot of evaluations where we score it, and I always end up having to come back to gut feel in the end. It's like I've not found them to be scoring things to be as useful as it seems like it would. It seems like it should be completely objective, but it isn't. So I mean, I'm not against making scoring criteria, but I think they will give us more. I think they don't really give you what you think they're going to give you.
Covey, then Kersey?
I just wanted to add that I have very little experience on evaluating criteria compared to Bill, but I do kind of fall kind of where he does, because I think one of the reasons we're all on this committee is we want to bring different ways of looking at these strategies to see which ones we think are important. So I think it's helpful to have some criteria as a guide, but I do think there is going to be a subjective part of kind of determining which ones make the most sense in kind of prioritizing going forward.
Kersey?
Yeah, I think it's important to have more the informal group meet once again, and then have more of this discussion at the next meeting. I think having a matrix with weights is a really useful tool to avoid biases. So although like we can have an open discussion to figure out, if there's an ultimate weight that could change how the matrix plays out. But in the equity work I've done, that's a really helpful tool. So I do think it'd be good to spend the next few weeks kind of thinking about that a little bit more, and all of us doing a little more research on the best way to evaluate.
Yeah, and I think as we do this research, one thing that's kind of come up through this discussion is if we do have a weighted system, then we might need to add another criteria for like extenuating circumstances, or like, provide an opportunity for that other piece, which right now, the way that it's written doesn't have that in there, because we haven't been talking about a like specifically identified, weighted list. I think the other thing that we can do too is, as we're doing this research or looking into these different areas, we can put notes in each one of these categories. So then, we're making sure that we're addressing them, because it is important to recognize that something can address all of these things in a very minor way, and then another project can be like completely focused on one. So that's where there's kind of a mix of subjective and objective pieces. So I guess I would encourage in terms of action steps, because we're wrapping up the meeting, if we're going to continue to meet again in a kind of fact-finding manner, to dive into basically figure out what questions need to be asked in the different subgroups of the actions that are being listed. And then with that, have this criteria list open while you're having that meeting. So then we can start to, as we're asking the questions about it, recognize where the gaps are, or if you're looking at that action and it's starting to rise in your mind of like, okay, like the more I'm learning about this, the more I think that this could make a lot of sense. If it's rising to that level and it's not addressing one of these things, then we need to fix our criteria. And we have the ability to do that before the next meeting. So that's kind of my main ask for the next round of those learning meetings with Cassie is having that really up and front and center, because as a reminder for the next meeting, that's our main goal is actually deciding on what those criteria are and how we're going to be evaluating. So then we can start deliberation in the, whatever the next inter-meeting period is. So with that, any final comments on this topic, or things that you'd like Serena, Cassie, and I to discuss for the meeting for next month, beyond the what we already mentioned about the prioritization and setting up of subgroups? All right, it's 1:00. So I think we still get until the end of the minute if there's other ideas or things that you want to bring up. Another topic that's come up through some conversation too is just having a little bit more clarity of how we can work together as a group, and to try to just understand a little bit better about how we're supposed to be communicating. And so we might do kind of a brief note on that at the next meeting too. But yeah.
And next meeting, you're going to come back with the rail thing, the oil rail.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that'll come out in the meeting packet. That proposal will come out in the meeting packet 2 weeks before, so we can make specific comments. Okay. Great work, team.
Thanks, everybody.
This felt more action-oriented and less process-oriented than all of our meetings so far. So I think we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Thank you, Neil.
Yep.
Thanks.